What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So today we're going to talk a bit about a new player in the emulation scene, I think, or the low-powered computer scene, I guess you could say, with a new Raspberry Pi being announced, and it looks awesome. I was curious how they would evolve the Raspberry Pi brand, but it looks like they are doing just that. And then, well, we see some new Nintendo and some new Game Boy games technically being released, or at least new versions, new limited edition runs of them. Pretty interesting stuff there, so a lot of stuff to go over today. As always, guys, enjoy these videos. Make sure you do hit that like button. It does help out, and get subscribed, and press the notification bell, as according to YouTube, that will actually help you to see videos from the channel if you would like to keep up on the news and all kinds of stuff going on in the gaming space. Today we're actually going to start with Fire Emblem Three Houses. Now, we are coming up to the release of that, of course, in July, and now that we're getting closer, there are download codes and stuff that are in stores, so you buy the little cards, you can technically pre-order that way, and then be ready digitally. Well, on the back of those cards, there's some new information that wasn't really known before. I saw Nibble actually tweet this one out after he seemed to gather it from a forum, and it does show the file size at 11.9 gigabytes, the Amiibo support, Switch Online support, and then DLC that appears to, I guess, already kind of be planned, which I guess isn't shocking for Fire Emblem with some of the stuff they do with the game and post-release monetization, but that would be new missions, equipment, and others. But the file size, 11.9 gigabytes, I think is fair for being what we assume to be a fairly lengthy RPG or strategy RPG experience. Amiibo support also makes sense. I am curious about that online support through the Switch, see what they do with that, but I am at least interested in Fire Emblem. I'm not as big into it as I think other people are, but I do like strategy-based RPGs, and while I wasn't into it on the 3DS, again, the 3DS screen, especially now seeing the Switch, it's hard to go back to that, so I'm looking forward to trying out Three Houses, just to see what it's all about there. We also saw Square Enix talk a little more about their remakes that they're doing. Think Final Fantasy VII, or even we had, of course, Trials of Mana getting a full remake, which is great, the Seiken Densetsu 3. Well, Yosuke Matsuda actually talked to Game Informer a bit about their process internally, because it sounds like people will actually pitch ideas internal at Square Enix about how they would go about remaking some of these games, and then they'll decide if they want to do it. Well, Matsuda also talked about how if they're going to remake a game, it is pretty difficult considering you have new and older fan bases that remember what the game was like and they want the remake to stay true to it, and then new fans that, well, they know how the gaming landscape is now and they're used to some of those mechanics and they kind of want those to be merged into it. So they have to please all kinds of gamers when it comes to that. So that's kind of an issue, and it is very difficult to actually remake some of these beloved games, but they don't appear to be concerned about things like profitability around a title. They think if it's worth doing and there's enough pull for it, they would do it. So I would like to think we're doing Final Fantasy VII Remake right now. We've heard rumblings about Final Fantasy VI possibly being looked at, but let's do Chrono Trigger. I mean, the only other game I think that would get the reaction that Final Fantasy VII got when it was shown that they're remaking it is Chrono Trigger. Think of Final Fantasy VII Remake, how it looks right now, but Chrono Trigger. Yeah, I think some people would go a little crazy at E3 if it was revealed. Also, I'm a little more interested now in the Dragon Ball Z Kakarot. They're doing, of course, the action RPG. I'm a little more interested in it now after they put this post out on Twitter, citing that there will be original stories to kind of flesh out backstories for certain characters. So it's not going to be the story that we know necessarily from point A to point B when it comes to, of course, things like the Saiyan saga in the beginning and then the Frieza saga to end out with Namek, and now we've heard that the Boo saga could be a part of this whole thing. It sounds like, though, they will have little stories in there that will be original to the game that we've never even seen, even citing that even the manga won't have these stories. So I guess they did some original work here, and I'm now a bit more interested because of that, although I think the gameplay still looks a little questionable. Looks kind of like Tenkaichi mixed with some more RPG elements, and I don't know if that's aged as well as they think it's aged, but I will of course play it and check it out for myself as a large Dragon Ball fan, of course, and I'm sure most big Dragon Ball fans will be doing it as well. And guys, some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's talk about these Nintendo and Game Boy games that are showing up. Do you remember how I talked to you about limited run games a little while ago doing a Star Wars collaboration where they're going to release a bunch of older Star Wars games and put them out there? And I wasn't really sure how they were going to do some of these because they were labeling things like Nintendo games, and they talked about Pod Racer, I thought, on the N64, but they definitely talked about Game Boy and Nintendo games, and I thought, well, maybe that's just for PC? Maybe they're doing something like that. Maybe they're gonna put them on other systems that are current, like a PS4 or a Switch or something. No, they're actually doing Nintendo cartridges, and they actually look pretty cool, although I do have some questions about how they're going to put this out there and what collectors actually think of this. But here is an image that they put out on Twitter, and you do see both a Nintendo cartridge and a Game Boy cartridge, right? So you see Star Wars NES, Star Wars Game Boy, and they're kind of set up in the, of course, cardboard with the plastic on the front, so you'd have to rip those things open. They say in the limited run games exclusive Star Wars Retro Mint on sealed card lineup, release number 1 and 2. Keep in mind, that's of 6, so we're gonna have 4 more after this. This goes down June 28th, so this week you're gonna want to be jumping on the limited run games. It's gonna be a limited cartridge, and I think they're doing this because, well, I mean, it looks cool, right? It's a cool idea, but you have to rip the thing open. And I think there's gonna be a lot of people who get these and go, well, I don't really want to rip this thing open because it's limited. It looks really cool. I wonder if a lot of people are just gonna buy, are they just gonna buy are you just gonna buy 2 of them if you want to play one? Or this is something that you seriously just hang up. I mean, even so, it looks like it has the hole for like the hanger and everything to make it easy to hang up. It's definitely something that a lot of people aren't going to open, but some will, and they'll play it and everything. I think a lot of limited run releases end up staying sealed for the most part for people, and I guess this would be something that would similarly happen here. I am curious how many people are interested in buying into the older games from limited run, like the NES and the Game Boy games. Now, they also mentioned on Twitter that they were looking into different places to create these cartridges, and they seem to be leaning towards Retrobit, not necessarily Infinite NES Lives. So I would expect it to be decent quality of the board and the cartridge and everything. But again, most people want it because of the packaging. The idea of buying a new Nintendo game in 2019 or a new Game Boy game is pretty cool. And you know what? If this does well, maybe they'll keep exploring more and more ways to release things like NES, Super Nintendo, N64, Game Boy cartridges. It's pretty cool. I like that they're going in this direction rather than just release stuff for newer systems. I like the idea of going back and doing retro stuff as well. Next up, let's talk about the Raspberry Pi 4. I got so excited when this got announced online, and I was so excited yesterday. It's so cool to see this because I remember for a little while there, they weren't sure how they would evolve the Raspberry Pi 3 because the biggest thing about the Raspberry Pi is it has to be cheap. They make it so that it's affordable. So generally, they stick to a pricing baseline of $35. They've kind of got away from that a little bit with this release, but I like it because that $35 option is still there. It's basically anywhere from $35 to $55 for the board, depending on the specs that you want, and it really only varies on one thing, which is the RAM. But here's the board, and I'm also going to go down some of the specs for you so you can kind of see how much they've evolved, because this is more powerful, as we'd expect, than the Raspberry Pi 3 or 3B. So let's take a look at this. We have a quad-core A72 Cortex at 1.5 gigahertz without cooling, though. There was a review that went out. It seems to be pretty much like locked to 1 gigahertz due to throttling. It has a video core 6 and a 500 megahertz. And the thing about this is the RAM is the biggest factor when it comes to pricing. You have a 1, 2, or 4 gigabyte configuration with low power DDR4, of course, micro SD storage, 1 gigabit Ethernet. It does have 802.11 AC built in and Bluetooth 5.0. Does have USB 3 for the back, and then has USB 2 as well. And then it also has HDMI 2.0 and Type D plugs. It does support 4K, however, they are still apparently setting that up, so at launch it won't have that, and it all goes through USB Type C with a suggested amount of 15 watts at 3 amps. $35, $45, and $55 depending on the RAM configuration that you want. This is absolutely amazing. I love that they are doing this. Now, the A72 compares well to the A53 in the fact that it pulls less power and can do more with that power. So that is really exciting. Of course, that means thermals will be a bit lower, but it still throttles if you just have the chip on air, like no heatsink or anything. I think most people expect that. A lot of times, if you buy a Raspberry Pi kit, it comes with a little heatsink, and that does help. You can also put fans. The scene around the Raspberry Pi is amazing, and to see them continue to evolve it is awesome. Like, USB 3 on the back is great, and apparently the Ethernet and USB 3 are not locked together anymore, so you get better speeds out of both, and this is just a great release. Now, I think it could help with the emulation scene. I think it will run games for the PlayStation 1 or the Nintendo 64 better. I'm still curious how much better though, because I saw benchmarks and it did seem to be running quite a bit better when it was on air and not really cooled properly. So I think it's going to perform favorably compared to the previous ones. But then the stuff around it, I mean, it has 2 HDMI outs, which is just pretty neat, I think. And one of them can support 4K 60 apparently, although I'll have to see that one, to be honest, to believe it. But especially after launch when they have to still do some firmware updates and everything. But really, really cool. Now here's the thing. It's available now to order, but it's sold out and a lot of places are back ordered through August 1st. So I put an order in. I even put a press inquiry in just to see if I could get a hold of them and get one sent out. Haven't heard anything there, but I do at least have an order in, and it might be the end of July that I actually see it, but we will take a look at the Raspberry Pi 4 and see how much better it is than that 3B that I also have. Next up, we got our first review for the Ryzen 3000 series. So we have the Ryzen 5 3600. It's built on AMD's 7nm, or they dub it Zen 2. And the biggest thing here is we need competition from AMD badly for Intel. We need Intel to get pushed around a little bit so they can start getting moving here, because they've been kind of complacent and kind of hanging out because AMD has been pushing them. Good news, it looks like AMD is about to do so in the beginning of July when some of these newer Ryzen chips go on sale, because we got our first review of it with some benchmarks and things are looking really good. They actually compared this thing to the i9-9900 CPU from Intel, and this is something else because it is competing heavily with this chip from Intel. Now keep in mind, the Ryzen 5 3600 is a $200 processor, but take a look at some of these sheets here where you see it actually going up against the i9-9900X in things like Cinebench, and then you get down to single thread performance and it is rolling, and that is amazing. It really shows what AMD is getting out of 7nm. Now, if you go down to the games, it's about right. I mean, here's the thing. If you're buying these processors with all of these threads and cores, most likely you're looking to do workflow rather than something like game on it, but still, you may want to do so, and it looks like it's at least holding its own. We have to take pricing into consideration, and the i9-9900 is several $100s more than something like the Ryzen 5 3600, and also keep in mind, the 5 3600 is an entry-level CPU for AMD. We're not even talking about the bigger stuff from them. So this is going to heat up, I think, a bit more between AMD and Intel, and I think this could be the closest we've seen AMD to Intel in maybe it might be since the beginning. It's been a long time since we've had actual competition from AMD, and I am really excited for. I'm trying to think right now. I mean, I'm going back to like AMD 64 Plus when we got amazed that they were going dual core, and there's like the 6200 and you could overclock that thing into almost the 4 gigahertz. It was amazing. I mean, I'm going back like to like the mid 2000s here, guys. I'm thinking like it's been a while, so this is exciting. And our last bit of news, let's talk about Doom Eternal. I'm excited for it. It's coming up this holiday, and I think this is gonna be really fun. Now, I'm mostly into the single player for Doom. There is generally a multiplayer aspect. We had, of course, Doom 2016 that had deathmatch. I didn't play it as much. I usually will play Halo if I want a deathmatch style game, Team Slayer, of course, but I did at least play some of Doom's deathmatch, and I thought it was pretty fun for what it was. But it looks like it's not returning for Doom Eternal. They're actually going to do the battle mode. Now, if you remember, we saw this shown off fully at E3 even, and they talked about how one person plays a Slayer and then 2 other people will play as different demons in the world. And the idea, of course, is for basically either the Slayer to wipe them out or the demons to kill the Slayer, and then it'll go back and forth until there's a winner. And I think it's a cool, interesting idea. However, it sounds like because battle mode is in this game, that means deathmatch will not be in the game. And I was a little surprised to hear about that. I'm not really sure why both can't exist in this game together. It seemed odd that it was like, well, we're doing one or the other, unless battle mode really took that much time to get done, which I guess some of the stuff they're talking about where friends or even, I guess, just randoms can jump in and be a part of it, it could take a little bit of time to do that, but I still think a competitive deathmatch is still something they could have worked on rather than just avoid completely. Maybe build up the one from Doom 2016 and make it a bit more fun. Now, it had a lot of criticism behind it. People weren't overly excited about some of the spawn spots, some of the weapon locations, just overall flow of the game. But I think it was still manageable and provided some entertainment. but we're getting battle mode instead. So I'm curious very, very much how people are going to respond to not having deathmatch, instead having this battle mode, because that means that this battle mode, I think, has to be really good, or people are going to say, well, you should just put deathmatch in there. And we'll finish up today with the comment from yesterday. This one is actually from Matake, who says, could we see full AAA games that has a free version but with ads instead, like the mobile game market? That is a future that I am terrified of. No, I don't want that necessarily for bigger games. To be honest, I don't even really like DRM or any of this games as a service, or even have to be connected to the internet to use this game that you just spent $60 on. That's not something I really enjoy seeing at all. That's why I do like what things like CD Projekt Red and even Nintendo has done. Sony's done it as well with certain games like obviously God of War and stuff, but then we do see at times games where you have to be connected to the internet either way. So it's tough, but here's the thing. Something I've learned about these AAA developers, you want to call them that, these big budget games that come out from these companies like EA or Ubisoft, they are very, very stubborn when it comes to these games. Let me give you an example. How much more money do you think FIFA would make if it had an extra 10 million players, but they didn't charge you $60 every single year? Do you think instead of doing 60 and they did 30 or 20 every year, they would get more people in and then they would inherently make more money from microtransactions with the Ultimate Team? I think so. You probably think so. What if it was free? Since this whole thing runs on active users, would there be more active users if it was just free from the start? Probably. I would say so. If you could just turn on your system, download the game without even dealing with it. Yes, here's the thing though. It wouldn't exist in stores, and basically what we're talking about at this time would be an all-digital future. Is that something that a lot of people really want though? Ads in games that are free and all digital? That's the question. Ladies and gentlemen, that's gonna do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit the like button, really helps out. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about, whether it's these new NES releases now in 2019 or Game Boy releases. What do you think of those? Do you like that Limited Run is doing that, or do you get kind of annoyed because well, you're not gonna open it, I guess, sometime for the most part. And then of course they're kind of expensive, but what would you like to see them do going forward outside of Star Wars if they get the opportunity? Also, what about the Raspberry Pi 4? Are you excited to see how that can perform with certain ROMs and emulators that maybe the 3B doesn't have the easiest time with? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.